well, 10 minutes is justified because, you know, the dons have spoken and there's very little to say on that. I think the point that I would want to make is that I take home, and I will not be very critical. I mean, I really admire this book. You can take issue with many things, and they can be. But I think it makes 5 distinct contributions. The first contribution is what the legendary Cambridge Dawn Joan Robinson used to say about India. She used to say that whatever you say about the Indian economy, the contrary is always true. and although John painted a somewhat dismal picture, this picture is actually very balanced. And for every negative that he talked about, there's a kind of a counter positive. And the book really allows you to see debate between the positive and the negative. And I'll belabor that point in a bit. The second important point I want to make is that this is a very, very sober assessment. It is not driven by the idea that John likes class or he likes society. It is not driven by the idea that he wants to paint India poor or he wants to paint India rich. This is a very sober assessment. The third point I want to make is that they really believe that history matters. That nothing happens as a result of a meteor hitting you at the time of a critical juncture. That history matters. The fourth point I think that comes out of this book is that it doesn't address a lot of very important questions, which unfortunately have not been addressed by scholars. And there's a lot of important questions on India that have not been addressed. And finally, this is a very Indo-centric account of India. This doesn't read like somebody from outside watching India. This is a very Indo-centric, and I'll talk a little bit about the political society debate that they bring in and why I think they're so sympathetic about how scholarship in India and how they think about what's happening in India. So to the first point, you know, they clearly believed, the authors clearly believe that India is on a different kind of growth path. And they do it unhesitatingly. So while they do believe that it is on a growth path, and that growth path is very different, it is respectable, and you have to acknowledge it, they also believe that there is jobless growth, and jobless growth is not sustainable. They also believe that you can't reap the demographic dividend if you do not have health and education, and if women are not taken care of. They do believe that the nature of caste in relation to Indian society has changed. But they do add to say that while the nature of caste and its relationship with society and interpersonal relations has changed, there is a lot of negative that still persists, and that can be damning for social, political, and economic development in India. They do believe that, like in other countries, while you had neoliberal growth, there is what they believe a Karl Polanyi type of counter-movement. So neoliberal growth has also been accompanied by a movement which might be producing some kind of a welfare state. They do believe that India has a democracy, it has a vibrant participatory democracy, but they puzzle over the fact that while this democracy is vibrant and participatory, it is not producing good governance. And to address all of these issues, they actually bring in a lot of very important literature, almost all the important literature that I know. Second, this is a sober assessment. So if you're looking at the debate on the poverty line, the authors do not take the view that some authors do, that there are more poor people in India today than there was before independence. Neither do they take the view that there are hardly any poor people in India. They weigh these debates, and in weighing these debates, I think they take a sober assessment. They acknowledge the fact that the way in which the National Sample Survey was carried out in the 55th round was problematic. So if you want to take up an issue like democratic decentralization, they acknowledge the fact that democratic decentralization has produced positive benefits. But they also take into account the fact that there is caste, there is social structure, there is elite capture, and that in the rural areas, democratic decentralization has often not worked. And what has worked instead is a top-down on effort from the higher levels of bureaucracy to actually see that things go down to the poor. There is a very serious attention to the fact that historical paths matter. So they will be the first person to acknowledge that you cannot understand the Indian economic transition just on the basis of a balance of payments crisis in 1991. In fact, they argue that you have to look at the accumulation of institutional, human, and physical capital development that has taken place over a long period of time that prepared India, and this entire issue of pro-business growth that took place in the 1980s to be able to understand why India was able to do what it did in 1991. Now, having said all this, there are silences in this book. And this is not just a silence in this book, but I think students of Indian politics and Indian political economy have really not addressed these issues in a straightforward manner. So when we are really talking about the growth transition, we are still not very clear whether it has happened because of class or because of ideas. What is the interaction between class and ideas? So when we are talking about this counter movement towards welfare, we do not know whether it has happened because of class or because of ideas. Of course, they bring in rich ethnography. They bring in almost everything that there is to it. But this is an area where I think this book kind of inspires you to think more deeply about social processes that are producing such large-scale change. And finally, the book takes, I think, a very Indocentric view, because there's been a discussion on social capital and the like. So they take Partha Chatterjee's civil society, political society head on by saying two things, essentially. One is that if you want to look at a society like India, you cannot just define civil society or political society as a bunch of impersonal relations, because that's not the character of Indian society. Then they acknowledge the fact, arising out of their own empirical work, that political society, which is considered not to be the realm of citizenship, but a bunch of people who make demands, and the state generally accedes to those demands as exceptions, is something which is not such a watertight compartment. Because people are often in political society and in civil society, and you cannot make those distinctions so easily. So for example, if you stretch that argument a little bit further, then, you know, when MKSS and Aruna Roy were fighting for the right to information, at times they may have been in political society, because they were struggling to get things that were not constitutionally allowed at that point in time. But when they got those rights for themselves, for different states, as for the nation as a whole, that entire issue of official secrecy became redundant. The same can be said about NREGS and other issues that. So I think this is a very, very important issue that they've taken on, especially because, and I'm not suggesting that Partha Chatterjee's view of political society is wrong. I think it's an excellent idea that has provoked debate, and I think this book takes us a little bit further and makes us think about how to relate a somewhat purely Hegelian idea in terms of how it really works on the Indian ground. Thank you very much for giving me some.